Let us cast our imaginations toward the breathtakingly beautiful Caribbean islands, specifically focusing on the sun-drenched, luxurious paradise of St. Bart's. In this idyllic setting, surrounded by crystal clear turquoise waters, gentle tropical breezes, and the promise of absolute relaxation, a dark and sinister fantasy is playing out in the mind of a ruthless woman. Picture the scene as Haley envisions it. The private jet lands, the warm sun beats down on the tarmac, and Bill steps down from the aircraft, completely unaware that he is walking directly into his own meticulously planned demise. In this twisted daydream, Haley stands waiting for him on the pristine white sands, holding a beautifully garnished, brightly colored tropical cocktail. It looks like the perfect vacation beverage, but hidden beneath its sweet, fruity exterior lies a highly concentrated, utterly lethal dose of an untraceable toxin. In this chilling manifestation of her ultimate endgame, Haley watches with bated breath as Bill takes the glass from her hands. He smiles at the woman he believes loves him, raises the glass in a toast to their romantic getaway, and drinks the poison cocktail down to the very last drop. The moment the liquid clears his throat, Haley's carefully constructed facade crumbles, replaced by a burst of hearty, triumphant, and deeply sinister laughter. In her mind, she has finally achieved the dark goal she has been working toward for months. With Bill out of the picture, she envisions a future filled with absolute, unencumbered freedom and an inheritance so massive it would secure her luxurious lifestyle for the rest of her days. She imagines the wealth, the properties, and the sheer power she would wield as his grieving yet obscenely rich widow. But as with all meticulously crafted criminal plots, the question remains, will she actually be able to execute this flawless murder, or will the universe intervene before she can claim her blood money? To truly understand the gravity of the current situation, we must take a step back and meticulously analyze the deeply disturbing pattern of behavior surrounding the beverages that were prepared exclusively for Bill. For weeks, keen observers have noticed a horrifying trend that should have set off massive alarm bells for anyone paying close attention. Haley has taken complete dictatorial control over everything Bill consumes, particularly his liquids. There was that incredibly tense, unforgettable moment when Caroline, simply parched and looking for a quick refreshment, casually reached out to take a sip from a glass of water that was resting on the table. Without a second of hesitation, Haley lunged forward, aggressively swatting Caroline's hand away with a shocking level of physical force. The excuse she provided was flimsy and defensive, but her true motivation was terrifyingly clear. She had to prevent Caroline from ingesting even a single drop of the poisoned concoction meant solely to destroy Bill's internal organs. This was not an isolated incident, nor was it a simple misunderstanding born out of germophobia or possessiveness. We must also recall the identical, equally disturbing confrontation involving Naomi. When Naomi innocently attempted to drink from a cup of specially brewed tea that Haley had prepared for Bill, Haley reacted with the same frantic, almost feral aggression. She physically intervened, snatching the cup away and vehemently forbidding Naomi from drinking her father's beverage. At the time, these outbursts may have seemed like the eccentricities of a highly controlling partner, but in hindsight, they were glaring. Neon-lit clues pointing directly to a slow, calculated assassination attempt. Haley was not protecting Bill's health. She was fiercely guarding her murder weapon, terrified that if anyone else consumed the tainted liquids, they would experience the symptoms, and her entire diabolical scheme would instantly unravel before her eyes. The insidious nature of the poison Haley has been utilizing is truly a masterclass in psychological and physiological manipulation. She did not opt for a fast acting, dramatic poison that would immediately draw the suspicion of the authorities. Instead, she chose a slow, agonizing, and cumulative toxin designed to mimic the natural onset of a degenerative neurological disease or a severe stress-related condition. Over the past several weeks, the audience has watched in absolute horror as Bill's health has steadily and undeniably deteriorated. It began with subtle, seemingly innocuous symptoms. He complained of persistent headaches, which he foolishly brushed off as the result of long hours at the office and the heavy burdens of his corporate responsibilities. But those minor headaches rapidly evolved into severe, blinding migraines that left him wincing in pain and reaching for over-the-counter painkillers that did absolutely nothing to combat the deadly chemicals coursing through his bloodstream as the toxin continued to build up in his system. The physical manifestations of his poisoning became impossible to ignore, even for a man as stubbornly resilient as Bill. The headaches were soon accompanied by severe, disorienting dizzy spells that would strike him without warning, forcing him to grip the edges of desks and tables just to remain upright. Then came the most alarming symptom of all, the relentless, uncontrollable hand tremors. We watched as Bill struggled to hold a pen, his hands shaking so violently that his signature became an illegible scrawl. He tried desperately to hide these tremors from his family, tucking his hands into his pockets or clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white, refusing to admit that his body was fundamentally failing him. Instead of seeking immediate medical attention, he allowed his pride and his misplaced trust in Haley to blind him to the reality that he was being systematically dismantled from the inside out. The tragic irony of this entire situation is that Bill was entirely surrounded by people who loved him, cared for him, and saw right through Haley's manipulative facade. Both Caroline and Naomi had expressed their deep, unwavering concerns about his rapidly declining health. They pleaded with him to see a specialist, to get comprehensive blood panels done, and to take a step back from his demanding work schedule. More importantly, they bravely voiced their growing suspicions about the woman sharing his bed. They pointed out Haley's controlling nature, her strange obsession with his diet, and the aggressive way she isolated him from his support system. But instead of listening to the rational, loving voices of his family, Bill became incredibly defensive. He dug his heels in, fiercely protecting Haley from what he perceived as unwarranted attacks and baseless jealousy. His blind, unwavering devotion to the very woman who was actively pouring poison down his throat is a heartbreaking testament to the power of manipulation and the dangerous consequences of ignoring red flags. This tragic trajectory culminated in a deeply harrowing, life-altering event at his corporate office. Despite feeling incredibly ill, battling a pounding headache, and struggling to maintain his balance, Bill stubbornly insisted on going into the office to finalize some crucial legal documents and business portfolios. It is a chilling thought to consider that the paperwork he was so desperate to complete might have included the very financial trusts and inheritance documents that Haley was counting on to secure her wealthy future. As he sat at his massive desk, fighting through the brain fog and the nausea, Caroline stopped by for what was supposed to be a brief, routine visit. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with unspoken tension and deep concern. During this fateful conversation, Bill, trying to project an aura of strength and normalcy, mentioned his upcoming, highly anticipated trip to St. Bart's with Haley. As Caroline turned and walked out of the executive suite, the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, sealing Bill inside what was about to become a terrifying trap of his own failing biology. The moment the door closed, the final devastating effects of the accumulated toxins were triggered. The sequence of events that followed happened with terrifying speed, unraveling in less than a single minute. Bill attempted to stand up from his leather executive chair, perhaps to grab a file or pour himself a glass of water, but a massive wave of dizziness slammed into him with the force of a freight train. The entire room began to spin violently, the edges of his vision blurring and darkening as his brain was starved of oxygen and overwhelmed by the chemical agent. He reached out blindly, his trembling hands desperately seeking purchase on the smooth mahogany surface of his desk, but his grip failed him. The poison had finally crossed the blood-brain barrier in a catastrophic manner, completely severing the communication between his nervous system and his muscles. Suddenly, his legs, which had carried him through decades of corporate battles and personal triumphs, simply gave out beneath him. They turned to dead weight, entirely devoid of strength or sensation. Bill collapsed hard onto the plush carpet of his office floor, the impact jarring his already fragile state. In those agonizing, terrifying seconds, he realized with mounting horror that he was entirely paralyzed. He could not move his arms, he could not lift his head, and most frighteningly of all, his vocal cords refused to cooperate. He was trapped inside a failing body, completely immobilized and unable to cry out for the help he so desperately needed. As the darkness closed in around him, stripping away his consciousness and leaving him entirely at the mercy of the poison, one has to wonder if, in those final fleeting moments of awareness, the horrifying truth about Haley finally pierced through his stubborn denial. Lying there on the floor, motionless, unconscious, and completely paralyzed, Bill was in the gravest danger of his entire life. If left undiscovered for even a few more minutes, the neurological shutdown would have inevitably progressed to his respiratory system, resulting in a quiet, tragic, and entirely preventable death. This would have been the ultimate victory for Haley, a localized version of her Saint Bart's fantasy, executed perfectly within the walls of his own corporate empire. She would have played the role of the devastated, weeping widow to absolute perfection, inheriting his vast fortune while secretly reveling in her own lethal brilliance. But fate, it seems, was not entirely ready to hand Haley her unearned victory, and the universe intervened in the form of a deeply intuitive and loving daughter. By an absolute stroke of miraculous luck, Caroline did not get far. Whether she forgot a crucial document, had a sudden, undeniable gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, or simply wanted to press him one last time about seeing a doctor, she turned around and headed back to his office. When she opened that heavy wooden door and stepped back inside, the sight that greeted her was the stuff of absolute nightmares. Seeing her strong, invincible father lying crumpled and lifeless on the floor sent a jolt of pure adrenaline and terror through her veins. She did not freeze. She immediately sprang into action, rushing to his side, checking for a pulse, and frantically dialing emergency services. Her rapid response, her refusal to leave the building, and her fierce dedication to his well-being are the only reasons Bill's heart was still beating when the paramedics finally arrived on the scene. Now, the narrative shifts from the quiet, insidious shadows of Haley's plotting to the stark, unforgiving fluorescent lights of General Hospital. Caroline's timely intervention has successfully transported Bill into the hands of highly trained medical professionals, but the battle is far from over. And I am not entirely sure that he will be quite so lucky the next time around. The medical team is currently working frantically to stabilize his vital signs, completely baffled by the sudden, catastrophic nature of his neurological collapse. But this hospital setting introduces the greatest threat Haley has faced thus far: the undeniable scientific truth of modern medical testing. The doctors will undoubtedly run every conceivable diagnostic panel, and the most critical question hanging in the air is whether they will order a comprehensive toxicology screen. Will the truth of Haley's heinous crimes finally be dragged out into the harsh light of day? There are multiple avenues for her exposure. Will the laboratory results from Bill's blood work reveal the presence of the exotic, sweet-tasting toxin she has been feeding him? Or perhaps, in the chaotic aftermath of his collapse, someone will secure the leftover tea or the water glass sitting on his desk, sending it off to the lab for chemical analysis. If the residue in that cup matches the poison destroying his nervous system, Haley's entire world of lies, greed, and manipulation will instantly collapse around her. The evidence is mounting, and the walls are rapidly closing in on her murderous Caribbean fantasy. As we look toward the future of this gripping storyline, several massive questions remain unanswered. Will this highly anticipated deadly trip to St. Bart's ever actually take place? Or has Caroline's heroic rescue permanently derailed Haley's ultimate endgame? If Bill manages to survive this catastrophic medical event and regains consciousness, what state of mind will he be in? Will the sheer trauma of his near-death experience, coupled with the undeniable medical evidence of poisoning, finally force him to wake up from his blind, foolish trust? Will he finally realize that the woman he has been viciously protecting is actually a cold-blooded monster who views him as nothing more than an ATM and an obstacle to her freedom? Or, in a tragic twist of psychological dependency, will he continue to blindly defend her, brushing off the toxicology reports as a mistake and walking willingly back into the spider's web? The stakes have never been higher, the danger has never been more real, and we will be watching every single second to see if justice will finally be served.